Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 169 of Humanity Rising. Humanity Rising is an initiative of Ubiquity University and over 300 partnering organizations from all over the world that have come together through this extraordinary pandemic we're all experiencing to provide an open space on a daily basis so that people globally can come together to share their experiences, their ideas, their solutions, their visions, and their hopes for the future. It's something that we have been doing now since the 22nd of May, and it's been enormously gratifying for all of us who've participated. The opportunity to build community virtually via Zoom at a time when we're all in lockdown, we're all engaging in social distancing, we're all wearing masks. And as we enter this new year, all of us are getting tired and exhausted. You saw the news today in Holland where there's been active protests. People just want this pandemic to be over, but it isn't. And it's going to be with us for some time as the human race both pays a price for what it's done in the despoilation of the environment, but also gropes through modern technology for how we ensure public safety in an overcrowded world with over 8 billion people who are now for the first time experiencing a pandemic that is challenging us in unprecedented ways. As we always do when we commence our programs, let us now just take a pause. And with all the craziness out there, let us take a few deep breaths. Let us close our eyes and place our attention on our hearts. See if you can actually hear your heartbeat for just a minute or two, with a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you are alive. You are in community. You are doing good work for the world at this critical time when every choice, every action matters. Listen to the heartbeat. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude for each and every one of you who've gathered with us today, I want to open our program with deep gratitude to one of the giants of our time, Stan Grof. One of the pleasures that we've had over the months that we've been convening Humanity Rising is that we've had the opportunity to take on virtually every conceivable issue, from the pandemic to George Floyd to the challenges of populations as they've endured lockdown, to cultural events, to the science of quantum physics, to the anthropology of new forms of solutions, looking at the mental illness that has been afflicting all of us as we've undergone this extraordinary event. We've looked at donut economics, regenerative economics. We've looked at cities rising around the world. And today we want to celebrate a single individual, a man who has contributed to, I would say, the illumination of human consciousness in a profound way that makes him the successor to Freud and Jung, the two giants of psychology in the 20th century, by expanding what they learned into deeper recesses. It was Stan Grof who took the notion of the unconscious and the prevailing wisdom that you started almost tabula rasa after you were born, to illuminate that it's actually in the womb. And in fact, before the womb, that people are shaped and our psyches are sculpted. It was Stan that really illuminated the notion that it is the planetary alignments around us, not just human behavior and human society, that influence our unfolding. It was Stan that did some of the major pioneering research on LSD and showed that the effects, the experiences of psychedelics had striking similarities to the experiences recorded over time since antiquity of the mystics. And it was Stan Grof in partnership with others that taught us that you could just simply breathe through the holotropic breath work and simulate, in effect, a psychedelic experience that would engender profound movements of the soul so that one could traverse from breakdown to break through in a redemptive act of healing. And his books and his documentaries, his teachings have gone worldwide. He's taught at Ubiquity University. Many of you have taken his holotropic breathwork sessions at Esalen and elsewhere all around the world. And Stan, in 2021, enters his 90th year. And I consider Stan one of my mentors and my teachers. We actually celebrated his 80th birthday 10 years ago by convening a global holotropic breathwork day, where on the same day, at the same time, hundreds of organizations and thousands of people did the breathwork together in a celebration of a truly great spirit. You know, there's a lot of false news. There's a lot of connivance. There's a lot of consumerism. There's a lot of falsity in this world. And there are individuals who have stood tall with an authenticity that shines bright in the darkness. And so today we want to start literally a 7-month celebration. And we've called together a number of people who've known Stan, Jim Hickman, who is the chairman of the board of Ubiquity University and has been engaged in neuroscience research, and was there with Stanley Krippner and Stan, met Stan right at the beginning when Stan had moved from Czechoslovakia, where he was trained, and then moved to Johns Hopkins University. And then from there began to develop some of the initial research on LSD. And then in 1973, he moved to Esalen Institute. We're going to have Michael Murphy with us, the founder with Dick Price of the Esalen Institute. And it was Esalen, more than any other single organization in the world, that midwifed dozens of pioneers like Stan into the mainstream culture. Esalen was the fountainhead of the human potential movement, and Stan was there during the 70s. And then we're going to hear from Rick Tarnas, who's now a professor of philosophy and cosmology and consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies. His two books, The Passion of the Western Mind and Cosmos and Psyche, are considered classics. They were instant classics and are taught in universities around the world. One of the great minds of our time, Rick Tarnas, one of the great astrologers of our time. And with Susan Hess Loget, who is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, and working with Stan and his wife, Brigitte, they came together to produce an amazing documentary that is going to be premiered in a few weeks' time, and we'll be alerting all of you to that. But it's with deep, deep joy that we want to commence our program today. And then every month between now and Stan's birthday on the 1st of July, when he turns 90, we're going to have different individuals of note that have worked with him and celebrated him over his lifetime to join us as we engage in this global celebration of a world treasure. So I would like to now turn it over to Susan, who has really been working with us and is probably the prime mover of the various sessions that we're going to be convening, the documentary film. So Susan, thank you for joining. I welcome you to Humanity Rising to commence our program.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm really honored to participate, and I'm really thrilled to also introduce Stan and Brigitte Grof, who are joining us today, as well as Michael Murphy and Rick Tarnas and Jim Hickman. So just to fill everybody in, for 6 years, Stan and I worked together on a documentary that highlights his contributions during his long career. And about 3 months after our last interview, Stan had a mild stroke that impacted his speech center. His thought process is still amazingly clear, but getting it into words is not always so easy. And so we felt that using the documentary as a vehicle to share some of these insights was a really good way to go. And so the people joining us today have participated in the documentary, except for Jim Hickman, who knew Stan at Spring Grove. And so we're going to start by introducing the documentary with the, what's that thing called? Oh, shoot.
Trailer.
The trailer, thank you. So Stan and Brigitte were also co-producers of the movie. They participated in the authenticity of it, and this is really a team effort. So we're going to share that with you.
I have been interested in these non-ordinary experiences for which current psychiatry and psychology has no special name. They're all put in the category of altered states of consciousness.
It's not easy to really question some of the really fundamental assumptions.
And 1954, we got a sample of LSD. When my own experience was culminating, my consciousness was catapulted out of my body. I became nothing, but by becoming nothing, I became everything.
I had to meet Stan. I knew he held the wisdom I needed.
Stan represents the long through line, a work over decades.
He uncovered the deep structure, the archetypal pattern, you might say, of the life process.
That kind of innocence that Stan has is this tremendous appreciation for everything.
There is a beauty and there is an intelligence which cannot come out of matter. It's clear to me the consciousness of the cosmic phenomenon.
Thank you, Susan. I hope everyone takes the opportunity to watch the documentary, which we'll talk about in due course. And now I'd like to introduce my very good friend and colleague with whom I've been working, as I mentioned, for many, many years, Jim Hickman, who knew Stan during those early days at Spring Grove and other places when Stan was doing his initial research on LSD. Jim?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And in sort of in line with the celebration that Jim described earlier that we're doing for Stan's 90 years of extraordinary work, I want to paint a little picture from my own experience as an example. Stan, you have actually influenced millions of people around the world over the past 60 years. And as we all know, often such an influence is not directly felt. But I want to let you know and give you a few examples of how from the time we met 50 years ago to now, your research, understanding, teaching, introductions to the altered state of our possible consciousness has affected my life, and I thank you for it. We'll go back to 1969, which is when I first met you, the summer of '69, and I want to start with a reminder of the cultural milieu of that time. In the US, sort of as evidence from my own experience, we were at war with Vietnam. And hundreds of thousands of people like me, I was 22 at that time, were battling this impulse on the part of the US government to take us off into some other land and fight and kill people. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of us were experimenting with psychedelic drugs, and I was one of those. I certainly had dozens of LSD, psilocybin, et cetera, experiences in those years. And I say this because it was important in what I was able to do with that, which got me a discharge, a medical discharge from the US military as psychological. Just decided that I had taken I went to the Manager Dream Laboratory in Brooklyn, New York to work with Dr. Stanley Krippner in exploring how altered states of consciousness can support the emergence of psychic phenomena in talented individuals. That was the summer of 1969. And one day, while we were experimenting, Walter Pankey came to the lab. And he and Stan Krippner knew each other. And Walter Pankey, at that point, was the director of psychedelic research project at Spring Grove. And he spent a day with us. We talked about a variety of things. And I learned that, among other things, Pankey did his Ph.D. at Harvard Medical School around facilitating mystical experiences with psilocybin. And his thesis advisor was Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who's better known as Baba Ram Dass. At that time, 1962, when Pankey was doing this research, Stan, you were experimenting at the Psychiatric Research Institute in Prague on the value of LSD in the treatment of psychologically ill patients. And I know one of your particular interests was patients who were in the last stages of cancer. And you became known in scientific circles for this early work in psychedelic therapy. So that all came to Spring Grove. And in July of '69, following up on Pankey's invitation to Dr. Krippner and me to visit with you all, I went to Spring Grove, which at that point had changed its name to the Maryland Psychiatric Research Institute. And I met both of you. And we spent a day. One thing about memory, Stan, at our ages, sometimes detail from 50 years ago may shift a little in my memory neurons versus your memory neurons. So what I'm going to tell you is what I remember. And if you remember something different, I agree with you. And we'll talk about it. But we spent a day together, and I learned about the kind of research you had been doing and how you substantially changed the focus of the Spring Grove research team, because you brought in the integration of psychotherapy to psychedelic research that altered their understanding of the value of psychedelics as a therapeutic tool. And at the time, it was called the psychoanalytic approach, which integrated psychotherapy with repeated low doses of psychedelics in a therapeutic setting. It was the first time at Spring Grove that, in fact, the team began to integrate psychotherapy into the before session and after session of the patients who were involved in the psychedelic research you all were doing there. And as I understand it, that changed the way the Spring Grove group did their research until the whole thing ended in the mid-'70s. So you were in a sense, a dynamic shift in the way psychedelic researchers were understanding what could be done, because a part of what you did was show that during kind of the transpersonal experience that occurs during LSD sessions, there's a value in integrating the mystical experience with psychotherapeutic insights. And that then gave a whole new kind of context to the psychedelic research that was going on at the time. And it influenced Spring Grove in a way that no one else had done. And I would just say parenthetically, this is what had been going on since Hoffman had his first psychedelic experience in 1943. And this psychedelic research had been going on around the world, a lot in Europe, Canada, the United States, and of course, Czechoslovakia, because you were the leader in the psychedelic research, in the psychotherapeutic point of view, at the Institute in Prague, where you worked before you came to the US in the mid-'60s. So that sort of captures what happened when I came down there in 1969 and met you, it gave a kind of context to what I had been doing on a recreational sense in the previous several years. And you were one of the first sort of thought leaders who said to me, I think what you did with psychedelics and the Vietnam War is to be applauded, because you really applied the whole area, mostly misunderstood, of the value of psychedelics to get yourself out of going to war. And that was important to me. It's one of the very important things you gave to me in those years. And there are two other experiences I want to highlight as examples of how, in a sense, from then on, our lives have intersected in ways that you're not really even aware of, but have dramatically affected my life. 4 years later, I went to Prague to give a paper on my research in psychic phenomena at an international conference with Czech scientists and Russian, Soviet scientists, US, Canadian, European scientists. And through a variety of experiences I don't need to describe, a young woman and I conceived a child during that experience. So my oldest son, Pavel, came from my intersection with Prague, Czechoslovakia. That's sort of highlight for you. And then what it led to was about 2 years later, you were at Esalen, I was at Esalen, and you offered to me the first guided LSD experience I had ever had. I had done dozens of trips, all recreationally, and I had read a lot and heard a lot about the value of a guided experience. And you offered to give me a guided LSD experience there in Big Sur, which we did together. And I highlight this because you, one, provided a supportive environment that allowed deeper states within me to emerge. And at the end of our experience, you helped me understand what it all meant. And what I want to highlight is the primary focus of that experience was my relationship with my son, Pavel, who was conceived in Prague, Czechoslovakia, and who I could not have a relationship with because of the Soviet blockades and everything in the Czech Republic. And you showed me in that LSD experience that I had had over 300 years, a series of relationships with Pavel, where he sometimes was my father, sometimes I was his father, sometimes we were colleagues. And it was one of the most dramatic understandings for me of my relationship with my son that I'd ever had before. And it changed that relationship so that as soon as the Soviet Union fell and Czechoslovakia was out from under the yoke of the Soviet hierarchy, I brought Pavel to the United States so he could go to college and live with my wife and me in Santa Barbara. And that direct result of the opening you showed me of how I had a long and deep, soulful relationship with my first son, Pavel. Then, over the next couple of years, I sat in on several of your holotropic breathwork trainings, and I learned it very well. And I integrated it into my meditation practice, which I actually was learned at the feet of Michael Murphy. He was my first meditation teacher. And that meditation practice, integrating the holotropic breathwork that I learned from you, became an essential element in my success as the director of the Esalen Soviet American Exchange Program over the next 10 years. So, and I still use some of what I learned from you, Stan, in my current teaching of applied neuroscience at Ubiquity University. So I just want to show you that over the last 50 years, all of your insights and understandings have had a huge impact on who I am and how I teach and how I share life possibilities with others. So I thank you deeply, Stan, for that. I hold great gratitude in my heart for you and the role you've played in my life.
Thank you, Jim. Stan, any comment you'd like to make? And then Rick, Michael?
Well, Jim, thank you very much. But I would have to change some of the things that you talk about history. Brigitte and I just worked for some time about interview where I was trying to describe how my LSD developed, you know, from the beginning, from the psycholytic into the what we call psychedelic. The small dosages, you know, a long series, all the way to the 3 overwhelmed sessions that are the psychedelic. The psycholytic was done mostly in Europe, and a lot of these psychedelic, this was done mostly in United States and in Canada. Now, I started with the psycholytic because I came from Freud, you know, and I think I got a lot of good things from these small sessions, from a series of the sessions, because I could get a sense how you get the content coming from the different stages. My patients talk it like peeling the onion in psyche, or what was the other one? As history, these.
A kind of gradual archaeological.
Archaeological, yeah. And so I thought many of the things how people were changed in the middle of the sessions because they were open eyes, and I got a lot of the ideas about it, why people experience certain ways, and or how they changed. For example, the interior. I also get a sense of what we call like coexistence, you know, the different stages. But I found also that this was not the best technique. You know, doing it with smaller dosages, with the allowing people to talk, having the eyes open, and so on. So about in the middle of the work in Prague, I started moving actually from much lower dosages. I started to have the patients have eyes opened, and we started using music. So when I came to Bringston into Baltimore, it was very similar to what was being done, you know, the psychedelic therapy. But I think I had a great advantage that I had an idea what probably is happening in these large dosages. If people started from the big dosages, there's no way you can understand the stages. Also, exactly, you know, in which time you move from the biographic into the perinatal matrices and so on, you know. So what I think what was happening, that they were basically doing these kinds of high dosages, and we are actually not allowed to give more than 3 sessions. But I think what people got from Spring Grove was the understanding of this. What I learned, you know, from the state after state, whereas they started right into the big dosages, where it's very difficult to figure out what is really happening there.
Yeah, the psycholytic form of therapy that you were using for all those years in Prague, which, as you say, kind of grew right out of the psychoanalytic, Freudian frame of reference. It allowed you to kind of gradually go deeper and deeper into the psyche, so that at first people would be getting more recent memories and then deeper memories, but still within this lifetime, like from childhood, from infancy, and then very gradually starting to reach all the way back into the birth experience and the encounter with death, and then beyond that even into transpersonal dimensions of the psyche that include karmic, such as Jim was just describing in his own experience, and it could also be of collective historical experiences. It could be archetypal or mythological, phylogenetic, and so forth. And so I think what I think this is why your perspective, Stan, your frame of reference for understanding the psyche is more detailed and has more specific psychodynamic threads that connect it to the whole history of psychoanalysis, from Freud through Otto Rank, Wilhelm Reich, Melanie Klein, right up to through Jung, very deep integration of Jung in ways that I think in general you don't see among the psychedelic theorists, because of your clinical training and the particular, I mean, you had that advantage of being able to bring patients I think you mentioned to me, every 11 days they were having these lower dose sessions, and you had hospital beds that they could stay in afterwards and so forth. And so it was a very a superb environment for this kind of gradual unpacking of the depths of the psyche.
Yeah, I think what I couldn't have done, without the psycholytic therapy was to create the coexistence, and then the cartography, the new cartography, from the postnatal, from the birth experiences, and then going into actually transpersonal experiences. And then we, at the end, we basically, when you got involved and we started working, we then all the way to the archetypes. And then was a possibility of linking work with psychedelics to archetypal astrology,
yeah, planetary movements. But I think Jim's other I think deep point is something that is, I think, what it represents, I think, the experience of so many people, which is that it's probably easy for you to, as Stan, easy for you to overlook the extent to which sometimes just a single encounter, when you helped someone through a holotropic breathwork session in a particular workshop, to long-term interactions with you, engagements with your work, just the tremendous transformation that you have exerted on so many individual lives, and that you've done it with a kind of altruistic grace and equilibrium that is often difficult to find among the major spiritual teachers that we've all encountered at different times, and that Esalen in particular has been such a magnet for, as we'll get into with Mike, I know.
Yeah, I think also what came to string growth, was the holotropic work, which I came in Prague, and then also the integrating the experience and analyzing, where I was bringing some of the Freudian element into it. But this was only after the session. I just didn't want to get too much credit to situation in Baltimore. You know, this was very, very beautiful protest there, and I think the psychoanalytic was sort of integrated to it, was bringing into it, but it was not certainly in any way, you know, created the whole project. This was done by Stanley Unger.
Well, thank you, Stan, Jim, Rick, for your comments on Stan's origins. And now, Rick, if you can put up the next video, we'll transition to Stan's next phase, which was at Esalen Institute, where he went beginning in 1973.
Stan represented not only another doorway into this, but also sobriety. I mean, he actually thought about it. Tim pretended to think about it, but he just proclaimed a vision of taking LSD every Sunday. If it's good, just have more of it. And we saw disaster after disaster during the 60s. So Bob Schwartz gave us some money, and Esalen provided a beautiful house, and off we went. And he became the leading force in our overall programming for most of the years he was there.
So, Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Wow. This is a revelatory for me, Stan. I mean, the story. And Jim, you and I have been so close for so long. I never heard the story quite as you told it. So it was news to me. And it really brings up a bunch of questions. Just for starters, Stan, we met in '65. You remember, with Virginia.
Yes, yes, I do.
Yeah, and Virginia brought you down to Esalen in '65. And I was immediately struck. You had to have been the handsomest man in the human potential movement. And of course, Virginia was thrilled to be there with you. And but I don't know how to place that in this journey of discovery of yours. So in '65, that's a question. Where were you in the unfoldment of this? And then we met a few times in between, and then I had the inspiration that if you came to Esalen, this would be fantastic for Esalen in many ways. So right now, I'm having a slight psychedelic type moment of memories passing through of the 14 years. I think you were at Esalen from what, 73 to 87? Something like that.
Yeah,
yes, 14 years.
73, yeah.
Okay, and as I would say that at least twice a year, there were gatherings that lasted a month that you organized.
Twice a year, yeah.
Twice a year, yeah. And Rick, you can help us with these memories. So my memories are of this, what went on there, which I don't think has been fully described by anyone yet. Jeff Kripal's big, 500, 600 page by account of Esalen's history, there's just not enough room in there to account for these incredible conversations so on for this period of time. So I've told myself through the years that a lot of insight has been actually lost to history because we didn't keep close journalistic records. So these cascades of insights often lost afterwards. Rick, again, I'd like your perspective in this, but along the way, your books were coming. You were gradually, as I experienced it, enriching and filling in a comprehensive picture of, well, I mean, dare I say, the human psyche and the human journey. I mean, it was big. In a time when academia generally around the world wants to go small so that you can get a promotion as a professor, as an expert in some tiny dimension of existence, and can declare yourself the world's leading authority on some tiny territory. And there's a general inhibition, pervasive, against going big and seeing things whole. So this is what I always told myself, one of the primary great things you brought certainly into the Esalen world was this comprehensiveness of vision, you know, and so how to map it is a really interesting story. I mean, so the first question I have, in what years did you have a first sense of a coalescence that you could say you settled into as the sort of picture you've presented in your books? I mean, it certainly was not in 65 when we met. I don't think it was in 73, but at some point there was this big coalescence that integrated more dimensions of our human nature than, say, other writers, say even somebody like Aldous Huxley, or certainly not Tim Leary, the people we can think of, even Terence McKenna. Your picture was more comprehensive, but filled with an immensity of rich material. So it's interesting for me. I mean, maybe we can't get to this right now, but
I think we can. Yeah, I mean, it'll be fun to.
Okay. Well, what would you say, Rick? I mean, there was a timeline in the coalescence of a big something.
This is the advantage of having written my dissertation many years ago on Stan's work back in the mid-70s. So we went over these things in great detail. But first, let's hear from Stan, and then I can fill in anyway in any way.
Well, Michael, in the first place, I would love to just use this opportunity to thank you. You know, anything that I think I have contributed, you know, to psychedelics and the transpersonal psychology basically came from you, that you brought me into Esalen, you know, at the time when it was in the early 70s, you know, where this amazing situation was happening, and I was given the possibility of having twice of month-longs every year, and look around and see what are the people, you know, who are really real pioneers in different areas, and we were able to choose the certain topic and bring them, and then we also developed this with Christina, Christine, the holotropic breath work. And so as we were bringing these major people, pioneers, you know, to the big house, we also had always 36 people for the space to do the holotropic breath work and so on. And so I had the chance to meet all these people, you know. unbelievable, you know, from.
Right. I mean,
I think you said that there's no university had the same faculty at the time. What were coming into this month long,
right,
and you know, this was done in a very different kind of situation than where people were getting things in conferences. You know, we were sitting very carefully and on big pillows, and then when we were finished, we would go to the bath and so on. And so I found the stories of people that people did not get from books and from their conferences. And we created so connected that at the time when I started the transpersonal psychology and ITA, you know, that I could call anybody, you know, and say, listen, you know, we would like to go to Bombay for the conference. We don't give you any money. We pay for the airplane and in the hotel, and everybody came. So this really started the whole transpersonal psychology. And then when I was trying to get the ITA, I needed 2 members. And nobody wanted to do it. And I walk around, and there was you and Dick.
Yeah.
And I say, I need to make this. Who would write it? I said, oh, we do it. So we write it. And so we were the members of the ITA. So, you know, many of the things that you're talking about, me today, you know, would not happen without you. It's amazing.
Well,
thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Stan. Well, thank you. You know, you were throwing off so many sparks as time went along. I mean, let's go back to Abe Maslow. When he was still alive, you know, he died in 1970, but he had, you know, driven into Esalen in the summer of '62 before our programs had started. But I had passed out a dozen copies of Toward a Psychology of Being to the staff. I wasn't there. And here he drives into this place. He said in retrospect that he and Bertha were driving down a dark road at night and drove down this road looking for a room, and it reminded him of the Bates Motel in Psycho with Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, here they were, and suddenly you go in there and here were these people. So, okay, as time went on, he decided, he and Tony Sudich, that they had to go beyond humanistic psychology and into a new dimension. And they looked for a name. And they finally, to make a long story short, because he wanted me to be involved with this. And God, I was 34 going on 24 developmentally. And they lit on transpersonal from you, which is interesting. This is 1970. So that's an interesting thing, that your influence had sparked off with Abe by then. And in 1970, where were you working then? You were at
Richmond?
1970.
1970.
Yeah.
Because you
Baltimore.
You were in Spring Grove,
yeah. Yeah, 73, yeah.
Yeah, so
And
it's
I came
interesting that you'd had that influence on Abe and Tony in starting transpersonal. And then, okay, then that went its way. And then I remember the actual event, the day when you had started the holotropic breathing. And I was sitting in the kitchen of the big house. And John Mack, you remember John Mack? He came into the kitchen. So it was just him and me alone. And he said, I've changed. Everything is different now. And was it? Because John, as you know, went on a tremendous course of development. I mean, you know, the whole abduction world, you know, the UFO type world, and etc. And so that was just one incident of these many that were happening. The sparks were being thrown off by these, and were often very seminal, as with Abe, transpersonal psychology, and with John, you know, who did so many things. So it's interesting, you know, there's a history yet to be mined, I think, in those month-longs that went on for 14 years. I mean, and there's no telling what we could dig up if we made a deeper dig into some of those conversations. But just the one final thing I wanted to say in these couple of minutes here is for me, among the other things you did is keep alive a tradition, building a bridge in the use of psychedelics from those earliest years through into the 90s. And what happened in the 90s, which is reflected in Mike Pollan's book, you know, Changing Your Mind. That's a good book, wouldn't you say? And he attributes some conferences we had in the 90s after you had moved somewhere. And you were involved in some of them, but there were maybe 3 times as many conferences in the 90s that he reports in that book. But the point again is that you kept this bridge alive, and people ask me from time to time, what do you see, Mike, Esalen role in sorting out what is good in the psychedelics from the madness that we saw a lot of at Esalen? And here was Tim Leary saying we should have LSD every Sunday. A lot of people were trying it. It didn't work most of the time. And then the legal restrictions and et cetera. So it's as if we push the flames back like coals to the back of the hearth, and the coals kept glowing in the back of the hearth, and then slowly being brought forward, you could argue now, gradually forward. And there's another cycle starting. But you, more than anyone else, I would argue, kept the bridge alive in a coherent way. So not only did you broaden and enrich our understanding, but just keeping alive the witness to a big unfinished piece of business in the world at large. So just keeping it alive, and so that it can now flower out. And now where the world goes forward from here is a big question with all this. So there's the next chapter. So yeah. Anyway, that's just some thoughts. Rick, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think Stan might have a very interesting story to share about meeting Abe Maslow at his house. Remember that time that you went to visit when Abraham Maslow's wife was a little unsure at the door about letting you in? Remember that?
That story? When you visited Abe Maslow, she wouldn't let you in?
Yeah.
You want to say it?
It's a fun story. You should share it.
I'll let you do it.
Yeah, do it.
Oh, okay.
You share
well,
it.
Well, in a nutshell, Stan had gotten a number of letters. This is in the late 60s. I've actually read the letters. He'd gotten letters from like Joseph Campbell and Abraham Maslow, extremely enthusiastic, having read the original manuscript that later became the first 5 books, starting with Realms of the Human Unconscious. But all those early books that were published starting in the mid 70s were based on this kind of massive manuscript that he had written during his first years after he got to the States, and he would leave after working at Spring Grove. He would then go to a park and write down basically the results of all the research that he'd done in Prague, which was just this phenomenal resource of insights, and then fitting it in, as you were saying, Michael, into this comprehensive and profound view of the paradigm, basically, for understanding the human psyche. Stan calls it a cartography. So they had read this and were writing Stan these letters that were extremely enthusiastic about, in Joseph Campbell's case, it was just all these insights that he had been working with for years in terms of the world's mythologies, the hero's journey and so forth. Suddenly, he had a new framework for grounding these in the universal experience of human beings being born and leaving the womb and et cetera, and facing death. And then in Abe Maslow's case, he wanted to meet Stan. Stan drives up to Massachusetts, and when he got to the door, he was surprised that Mrs. Maslow.
And Bertha came to wife.
Yeah.
Bertha,
yeah, comes to the door and saw it was Stan, and found out it was, and seemed extremely reluctant to let him in the house, as if he was a kind of threatening figure. And Stan couldn't figure it out. You want to say more about what happened, Stan?
Well, but basically I did send that I was unwelcome, that there was almost likely to close the door. And then after a while I got in, and Abe was upstairs, on a couch, and he was after heart.
He had a heart attack.
And then we spent like most of this day there and had a wonderful, wonderful time. Remember, it's almost like Freud and Jung,
Yeah, that first meeting, where they talked for 13 hours.
And then we came downstairs for dinner. And then I asked, that I had this feeling that I really had this very strange kind of welcome. And then Bertha, the wife, said, that when he read in this large book that you talked about, that she was getting so excited by the similarity between his Mike experiences, that she had the
Abe Maslow was so excited.
He was so excited. Abe was very excited.
That was so similar. She had those experiences spontaneously, and I had these experiences with psychedelics, and there was such a similarity. So she said that he was getting so
agitated.
that she was worried that when I came there and the two of us would start talking about it, that she would have another.
He would have another heart attack, and she'd lose him.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was just one of those extraordinary moments. It really was like the Freud-Jung meeting where they were just so excited to talk, etc. But Maslow's wife was understandably protective of her husband's life, thinking it might be threatened. I couldn't agree more, Mike, with your description of the importance really of what Stan did during the years he was at Esalen. And just to respond to that first question you had about like when did the ideas start to emerge in such a form in Stan's mind that he was able to formulate this more precise delineation of the different levels of the human psyche and how they related, how different neurotic or psychotic syndromes or symptoms connected to these different levels and the different perinatal matrices of the birth process and so forth. So when he came in 1965 for that first visit to Esalen and his first visit to the US at that point, at that point he would have been about 34 years old, and he was just starting to have his own perinatal sessions at that point, but hadn't completely kind of formulated it. And that came in by 1966. And he gave a paper.
66 in Amsterdam, yeah.
In Amsterdam.
First time, when I created this 4 fantasies, you know, that I still appear in all the books. That was the first time.
So it was that was a very
up to way to the holotropic experiences. You know, we're going all the way to birth, and then afterwards we're going to transpersonal experiences, and then the archetypes much later.
So the framework first started to emerge with clarity in 1966. He gave this paper at a conference in Amsterdam on psychedelic therapy. Well, psychedelics in this general sense, though he had been using psycholytic therapy with lower dose sessions that were so helpful in actually opening up these. He also brought forward the coex systems, which are these the understanding of the psyche at its more Freudian psychoanalytic level, postnatal, where you have these different experiences, events, traumas, etc., at different times of life, but all of those that have a particular similar character that all relate to, say, experiences of abandonment or experiences of feeling deeply loved, etc. Yeah. They all group together, and the different events in one's life can emerge. Those memories can emerge as a package. Can be brought to consciousness and released in a very powerful catharsis. So that by 66 he was starting to get the basic paradigm, and then by 67 Stan had his last of his own powerful perinatal sessions just weeks before, like basically about 1 week before he got permission to come to the United States and live, and, well, actually to come and work. It turned out that it was a permanent move because a year later, the Soviet, the repression of the tanks came into Prague, and Stan was not able to go back to Prague after that for a long time, till the 90s. So by 67 and 68, that's when he was writing this kind of mega manuscript that contained the whole clinical handbook of how to use psychedelics and what the different levels of the psyche, and with an increasing appreciation of the importance of the transpersonal dimension, which, as you say, got adopted. Right, but it hadn't been published yet, and it was you, Michael, there. I think you were, it was in 73, and you invited him to come to Esalen and write his book there, and live there. And you got arranged for that house about half a mile north of Esalen, right on the cliff there, for him to live and work. And it was a kind of spontaneous thing in starting about a year after that Stan started conceiving and organizing these month-long, called them month-longs, seminars, workshops, in which he would invite all these leading, it could be thinkers, scientists, could be Carl Pribram, David Bohm. It could be, of course, Joseph Campbell, could be Gene Houston, Jack Kornfield,
Fritjof Capra, and
of course, Fritjof Capra was extraordinarily
Gregory Bateson was
Rick
there.
Tarnas.
Rick Tarnas.
Yeah, well, I was just the young guy who lived there at
You were
Esalen.
very young, yeah.
Yeah, and I had become the
Did all the time,
director
yeah.
of programs there for the starting of the 10 years that I was there. About halfway through, I became director of programs. So, but prior to that, I was in the fortunate position of just kind of absorbing all these thinkers' works. And Stan was also inviting people like Lama Govinda or various shamans and mystical teachers from other cultures, so that there was a tremendous kind of interplay of East and West, of modern and ancient, of psychological, philosophical, religious, and therapeutic practice as well, transformational practices of various kinds. So it was such I agree with you, Michael, that really, I mean, you in the 60s, Mike, and were I think the key person. You were the key person in inviting all those remarkable teachers that really made Esalen such a center of new ideas, or of revivifying and exploring ancient ideas with new eyes, and also practices. But then you left in the late 60s, moved up to the Bay Area, and I think it really was Stan who, it certainly, while there are all these great teachers that I was attracted to come and visit, and then eventually just stay at Esalen, it was Stan of all of them that I came to study with, and he then became this magnet for all these other people to come, and he became the nexus, the node of a great web of drawing all these teachers from many different
Rick,
parts of the world.
I think it's interesting how you came to Esalen. I think that's.
Well, why don't we use that as a moment to segue to the next video, because that's about Rick Tarnas.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And can I add just a little something for Michael? Oh, too late.
I would like to say something about Michael, if I can.
Yeah,
very
please.
Short.
Go ahead, Brigitte.
Michael, that's something a little different. This is when I was watching, this new America with all the flags, their flags, and it's an amazing situation.
The inauguration, you mean, or what?
Yeah,
the inauguration of Joe Biden.
Then what I was coming back was that you also came when I was getting the
green card, citizenship.
Citizenship. Was getting citizenship.
Yeah.
Again, I needed two people, and of course, you and Elsie sort of came there and brought me in America. So,
what an adventure we've had! I just have to say this, guys, and thank you, Jim Garrison, for pulling this together. We right now, Esalen's at we've been kind of wiped clean by this virus, and we've been shut down for a year, we had to let 100 people go, so we're having our own corporate shamanic dismemberment and thinking a lot about the next steps. So it's a very fertile moment for me and for some of us thinking forward. I would certainly like to explore more with you guys, all of you, about where to go from here. I mean, we have a lot of ideas, but there's a lot, it seems to me, Stan and Rick, you were so close to it in those particular years when you were the primary running what came to be called Esalen Center for Theory and Research. And we've kind of split the Institute, as you know, in the 90s into these two functions. It was always implicit, but now we made it conscious to have the public programming. We were up to 500 seminars a year down there, say in the 90s, and then those conferences of the type you did, and the type I had done prior to moving to San Francisco. So in other words, here we are again now, deciding how to take the next step, identify the open vistas ahead into the undiscovered country of our future possibilities. It's a very interesting, it's the biggest hinge moment we've ever had. Esalen will have been going 60 years come this summer, you know, when the time we took over. So this is the biggest hinge moment since then. And I want to continue this conversation in some ways going forward.
Great, yeah.
And to dig deep into including some stuff that I think we've lost along the way. And anyway,
yeah,
just to
that's
put
great,
that up,
Mike.
just to put that on the table.
That's great. We should do that. And I think maybe after Susan shows this this clip, it would be I'd enjoy maybe just saying a word or two about the role I think Esalen has played along with Stan's work in these important influences that it's brought into the world. So, Susan, why don't we roll away there on with the film clip?
Gita, did you want to say a quick word, or just wait till afterward?
Sure.
It's for Michael, I think, but it's okay.
We'll catch you on the other side.
Okay.
You know, the very first lecture that I ever heard Stan give in March of 1974 at Esalen, I asked him at the end, what do you do in the case of someone who's in a really bad trip where they're descending into an incessant loop that they can't get out of, and they feel like they're losing their sanity, and these things can have enduring effects, you know, too. And he said with a kind of poetic conciseness that I've never forgotten, he just said, well, the full experience of an emotion is the funeral pyre of the emotion. And he just pointed out that we have a tendency to, of course, wall ourselves off from the pain, the scary things in our psyche that are trying to emerge. But he says that's actually the way out of the pathology of the suffering. So he was able to convey with that one sentence the idea that bad trips and negative material, which Tim Leary did not prepare the masses for, were actually a royal road to transformative healing.
Yeah, that was a big insight, and that was the very first lecture. It was there in the big house, March 1974. That first lecture I'd heard of yours, and I had worked at the Haight-Ashbury drug clinic. containers that could help people with these experiences and facilitate the most life-enhancing results. And Western civilization had kind of gotten rid of sacred rites of passage, and yet this is just what LSD needed. And in many ways, you, Stan, helped create an environment that was within a more secular frame of reference, but it was still, it was able to help people take the full range of psychedelic experiences that could come up and integrate them, and to see how through suffering one can be healed, and through facing death one can live in a deeper way than ever before, and that all these kind of mysteries of how we die into life, and how the very moment of death is actually a birth, a loss of the womb, is as actually the entrance into life that can't happen any other way. So all these kind of mystical insights that are part of the ancient death rebirth kind of mystery religions, and the shamanic rites of passage of many cultures, you were able to kind of carry into a Western psychiatric transformational practice that was just a crucial blessing. I always felt that you were kind of a reincarnation of the ancient Egyptian death rebirth mystery high priest, you know, the way you were able to do this for our culture. And then getting back to the issue of what Esalen provided something for you, Stan, for me, for all of us here, I think. It really was a kind of cradle of a new worldview, of a range of perspectives. It's not like just one paradigm. As Mike always liked to, Mike Murphy and Dick Price, the two founders of Esalen, I had a saying that I always valued. They said, no one's allowed to capture the flag here. That, like, no one ideology, no one teacher or psychology or practice or philosophy can ever take over. This is going to be a radically pluralistic place of exploration for many perspectives. And so that pluralism, which is, you know, kind of America at its best, was really carried at Esalen, and it's central to it. But it was a pluralism that allowed for the respectful engagement with many perspectives that were too easily dismissed in the academic world and by the high culture authorities that of the establishment. And you know, I came from my 4 years at Harvard to Esalen, and Harvard was a place that had many amazing teachers and great intellectuals and so forth, but Esalen was like on another level. It was just like this kind of it was dazzling. What is it, 14 acres, Mike? That something like that, 11 to 14 acres or something. They're right on the cliffs of Big Sur at this westernmost frontier of the continent. That's also closest to the east, but it's such a frontier of exploration. And there, I think both you and I, Stan, had this experience in the late 70s. We shared it with each other. We didn't quite know what to do with it, which is these were experiences in non-ordinary states. I can't remember if it was LSD or ketamine, or which was the particular sacred medicine. But we had these experiences in which we became convinced that at some level, Esalen was a kind of, like a cradle of a new era, a new age, a new even with a kind of religious aura around it. It had this kind of I don't know, you remember that, Stan? We're aware of its of its having lived there every day for year after year, more than a decade. We were aware of its being, it's a magnificent place in its beauty. It has great depths and traditions and so forth, but it's also all very human. And yet we are having these experiences that were convincing us that from a kind of larger historical perspective, Esalen was going to be seen as a kind of cradle of something fundamentally kind of world historic. And, I suspect in some ways that's already true. It's already the impulses that were nurtured there. Some were born there, some were nurtured there, some were then disseminated from that epicenter out into the rest of the world. Those have gone deeply into the world culture, and they're having a profound effect in the world. And Jim Hickman and the Russian-American exchange, Mike, or Soviet-American in those years, Mike, all that you did in that area, and of course, Jim Garrison and your work with the State of the World forums and so forth. These are kind of like global initiatives that really had very practical geopolitical consequences, including having Russian people from the Kremlin and people from the U.S. State Department at the height of the Cold War having hot baths together or doing holotropic breath work and just kind of melting their armor and having a basis for a mutual regard that was impossible within the hyper-armored Cold War international relations in the early 80s. So I'm immensely grateful to, of course, both you, Stan, and you, Mike, each of you having brought forth, I think, just an extraordinary gift to the world that I, in my own personal life, of course, has just been absolutely fundamental. But I know I'm not speaking for myself in knowing it's the extraordinary ramifications that it has brought, the impulses that it has brought into the world and enriching its life to this very day.
That's a beautiful,
Mike.
Rick, thank you. That's so beautiful. I'm sitting here looking at this gallery shot, and the history right here, it's very interesting. I mean, what's up for us at Esalen right now is what's the next step, the future. And I think of this, Jim Hickman, we talk about that so often. And Jim Garrison, you picked up a baton there. And I am thinking, of the specific ways in which this effort we all made together fed straight in to the Russian-American thing, because Dulcie, who's around here somewhere, found some letters I had written to Russians in 1966, about the time we met, Stan, because we were so many people from Europe, Fritz Perls, and then he had you remember a guy named Knoblauch from Czechoslovakia, something called psychogymnastics. Anyway, and he told us about the psychedelic work actually going on in Russia. So one thing led to another, and when some of us went over, 3 of us in 1971, to meet their folks into something they called hidden human reserves. And anyway, we don't have time today to talk about this, but this is Jim Hickman, where you connected a year later with Stanley Krippner, and this thing took off. And then one thing led to another, and it branched out. But the root of it was the same general trying to come to terms with the complexity of this age between the death of the old gods and the birth of the new gods, and this rich mix. But anyway, just leaping forward down the long arc of time to a night where Stan, you were there at a dinner in Moscow with Vladimir Mykov, who became the lead guy in transpersonal psychology in the Soviet Union, then Russia, and Henryk Burbulis, who was Yeltsin's Secretary of State. I don't know, Jim Garrison, you must have gotten to know Burbulis, but anyway, they had been at a holotropic event, Stan, you had done that day. This had to have been about, 6 or 7 years ago. And you were there with, and there were a number of us who had been involved in all of these, about 15 of us. And Burbulis stood up. Here he was, after a holotropic breathing with you. He'd been the Secretary of State under Yeltsin. And the two of them had signed the document to dissolve the Soviet Union into 15 independent republics. And he stood up and drank a toast. And he said, and looking at all of us, you, Mykov, all of us, and said, Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin, and I signed this document, and for this, I live with half my countrymen saying I'm a traitor and half a hero. But whatever is the case, and then he passed his glass, he kind of looked around at all of us. You say we entered history. And it really hit me in a way, this long arc, the reason we went over there in the first place was drawn by the same basic deep dream with which I started Esalen with Dick. Then led to Russia. Then we're leading all the way over there, and it was a kind of it was a big something for me, and it's reaffirming for me, Rick, that the great unfinished business now ahead of us in our work. We can see that at times we have done some real things.
Yeah, you could say that. Right.
Gyms, the two gyms are, all that you guys have done and are doing is so organically related to our past and to this conversation. So this is not merely a wandering in the dark, although it has involved a lot of wandering and a lot of learning and a lot of, oh my God, regrets, my own regrets. But if you're going to live like we have, you're going to make mistakes, and you have to get up again and keep going. And Esalen's facing now really been flattened and keeping going. And some of the things we're thinking of doing are new. But it's the continuity. And we're not finished yet. And still a lot to learn maybe from things we have not fully mined from the past even.
I think that's important.
Yeah, I think of your work, Stan, it's like from one point of view, it's getting better and better. It's aging like the greatest Bordeaux wine of all time. It's still pregnant with possibilities. for the future. And there is this tendency, you know, in so many folks in our lives that want to get really rock solid rooted back into the past again. You know, let's go back to this. Let's take Esalen back away. It was early 60s. I said, the only reason you're saying that is you weren't there. I don't think you want to do it. I mean, it's, you see what I'm saying?
Do it like on a spiral, you know?
Yes, well, it is. Yes, there's a lot of the spiral, but anyway, I'm thinking out loud here, and in another minute, I'll be totally incoherent. So anyway,
I think
we will follow up on those important.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I would love to have a conversation with you, Michael,
right?
About some of the possibilities.
Yes.
But it's time, I think, to wrap up this session.
Okay.
And Brigitte, I think we'll start with you. You wanted to make a comment some time ago, and then we'll go in the same order. Jim, if you want to make just some final statement, and then Michael, and then Rick, and then Stan, final word from you. So if we go in that order, that would be good. And Susan, you can add a word. Brigitte.
Yeah, Michael, I wanted to thank you so much for creating Esalen. I had the honor to come there as a work scholar, actually, with 26 years old. Yeah. I came for a month long, one of these famous month longs, and I stayed as a work scholar, and I went to another month long. So it's just so great that you're providing that place. It's such a beautiful place, and you don't leave the same way you arrived. Mm-hmm. It is a transformation is just happening, and community and the beauty of the nature and the people that come together. Everybody comes there to change their lives or find new ways. Also work scholars, they were just like finding a new way. And I've experienced community togetherness, the singing together and things like that. And of course, the months long with Stan and Christina and the amazing people who came there, the teachers. And I met Rick there 35 years ago. And I think I even took that picture when Rick was still very young. I was young, so we're all young. and the holotropic breath work, and of course, Stan. And for me, also what really struck me there was that there are such people with such a depth and a dedication. And as you were saying, like Stan he has stayed that scientist doing all these far out things, and Rick is this scientist, and he's doing far out things with astrology. I mean, come on, so such good quality people who are so clear. And so Esalen is wild and interesting and very grounded on the other side, and it's just a beautiful place. And I really want to thank you from my heart. I think I speak for many people, and I wish all the best for a rebirth in these challenging times. This place must go on. It's just good for the world. So,
and thank you for everything. Thank you for that friendship I'm looking at, the two of you there. Wow.
Yeah.
Jim.
Made in heaven.
Yeah, I'd first underscore one of Michael's last comments about how important it is for us to recognize the arc of influence that our lives have.
Yeah.
And my experience, I'm involved in a project I created called A Life Worth Living. And my experience is that you have to have lived a certain length of time to truly understand the impact of what you might have done 50 years ago, that only today can I see. For example, that I decided to resist the war, get out of the army.
Yeah.
And I was in a neuropsychiatric hospital for 2 months waiting for my discharge. And it just turns out that in that hospital, they had the most extensive library on parapsychology that I have ever found anywhere. And I read every book in the library while I was waiting to get out of the Army. And that set the template for the rest of my life. I had no idea that's where I was going. But I met Stan Krippner through that reading. I went there. Then during that summer, I met Stan Grof at Spring Grove. And that then led me to several experiences, Stan, I described, that you've had an impact on my life. And the arc of that impact, I still feel. And I would underscore one of Rick's comments about, Stan, how your presence at Esalen and both the intellectual context you brought to all of what happened and your capacity to attract extraordinary people into your presence, in a sense, both learn from you and teach one another. How much all of those people had learned is a good example, Stan, of what I said in the very beginning. You've had an impact on the lives of millions of people around the world. And I'm just one of them. And once again, I thank you for showing me when I was 22 that what I'd been doing for the last couple of years by taking LSD twice a week for 18 months, basically, was actually a pretty good introduction to the range of consciousness that then Esalen broadened my experience in, et cetera. And so the arc, Stan, that you have, in a sense, embodied in my life, I feel great gratitude for. So thank you very much. And Michael knows about how I feel about Esalen, so I don't have to, give you great accolades. But Stan, this experience today has helped me see how that arc has played out in my life and continues to impact, the teaching I do with other people. And for example, I did a blog last week on the relationship between neuroscience and psychedelic experience. Because as you know, the psychedelic therapy has come back into vogue and now is being explored, very seriously by people in a variety of places around the world. And neuroscience has brought a new understanding to a lot of what happens in the brain and the heart and all of that. And I credit my experience and learning and interest in all of this partly to, what you've done in my life. So thank you very much, Stan, for being there for me.
Very, very much. Thank you so much. Thanks for everything that you said, in spite of the fact that I didn't sort of quite credit for Spring Grove. I had to really, the way I saw it was a great, great place, and obviously a beautiful, beautiful experience there. And I thank you for everything.
Thank you, Jim. Michael.
Well,
final words.
Two things. I love you guys all. God, thank you for pulling this all together in one place. And just one word: onward. Onward.
Carpe diem. Rick.
I'll be similarly brief, just to say, I think I wrote a poem about Esalen many years ago, 40 plus years ago, that is often a prose poem, kind of an ode to Esalen. But one of its essential points was just how much it was it was and is a place where people go to for profound transformation, and in some sense it is as much a state of consciousness as it is a physical place. And that it's a place that we carry in the human heart wherever we go. It's a temple of death and rebirth in certain ways, and you can see Stan's work as being in exact continuity with that, just as Esalen is on sacred land. It is sacred land, and the beautiful the cliffs, the redwoods, the mystery of the hot springs, and the creek, the waterfall, all that is it's a very powerful shamanic and sacred land, and meeting of water and cliffs, mountains. But Stan's work is a similar kind of, it carries that same high drama, and it also carries that quality of nurturing people's ability to go into the depths of experience and go through profound transformations, and then carry onward, as you said, Mike. It's yeah. So kind of that's another marriage made in heaven. Esalen and Stan's work and Stan's being, his presence. It was a great confluence.
Cartographies, yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Susan.
Well, so I just want to speak to, I think the goal of the movie that Stan and Brigitte and I did together was to bring forth this information that was nurtured during Stan's years at Esalen, and then later through the ITA conferences with his collaboration with you, Rick Tarnas. And so the need for a ritual, the need for, at this transformational moment in human history, that there's something to hold this deep inner journey that we all need to take, this collective death rebirth, that if there isn't some context or structure to hold it, then it could get screwed up again, as Stan said in a conversation with Dennis McKenna the other day. Here now is this research and this openness to allowing psychedelic exploration or inner process through holotropic breathwork and other techniques. But if we don't have a context or a ritual to hold it, then there's the risk that something goes off again. And so I'm so excited to be participating in this. And so thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Rick and Jim Hickman, for joining us today, because this is the beginning of a series of segments that will provide more information, so that hopefully people will be inspired to take this inner journey, to do this work, so that we survive this transformation. So anyway, many thanks to all, and especially to Stan and Brigitte. But Stan, you held such space for me, as you have for so many, to do the deep work. And I feel transformed as a result. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Stan, any final words?
Well, I haven't heard you. And you brought a lot of the ideas from Esalen on a much larger forum. At the time when you brought the triangle,
the State of the World forums.
State of the World forum.
Yeah,
Gorbachev.
You brought,
those were great days.
Those of us coming from Esalen, you sort of brought us into it, and you sort of bring it on a completely different level. And at some time you were thinking that you would be politician. And I really wish we would have somebody like that.
No, he has a higher destiny than that.
And the amazing thing that I heard in Moscow when you were talking about the situation in the world. I hope you continue something like this, and we have the chance to hear about it.
Well, thank
and,
you.
With the ubiquity, I mean, you could also bring it on a whole other level. So thank you so much. And of course, for arranging this kind of thing.
Well, it's been my deep privilege, Stan, to work with Susan and today with Michael, Jim, and Rick, Brigitte, to honor you. You're one of the world treasures of our generation. And I think it's important for us to honor the legacy that you have blessed the world with over decades of rigorous, heartful research and generosity. Michael, none of this would have happened without you and Esalen. I consider my experience meeting you and Dulcie and Jim and Rick at that conference at Cambridge University back in 1980. When was it?
89, we were all in Cambridge University.
Was it 89? I thought it was much earlier than that. But in any event, it was it really changed my life, and I ended up starting to work with Jim Hickman, and so
that was
Michael,
yeah.
Everything that we've done at Ubiquity and now Humanity Rising has come out of the experience that I had with Esalen Institute. That's your genius. And in some ways, you were the one who helped birth Stan into the world, and Rick into the world, and Jim into the world, and me into the world. And so I want to just note that this is Michael's 90th year this year. And so I'd like to just note that, everyone, because we'll be back on Michael's birthday or pretty close to that as we honor. And it's also Mikhail Gorbachev's 90th year.
Yeah.
And,
actually, I'm older than Stan. No, I got there first.
Yeah, Mike
I had
turned
actually
90.
the chance to talk with him there, in the forum.
So
because Raisa was there, and many people didn't speak Russian, so I had to get a few minutes talking with him.
Yeah, those were great days. So thank you, everyone, and we'll be back in the 12th of March for another session with Stan and other luminaries that have been
February,
excuse me, and then also in March, April, May, and then June. So we'll have Stan's celebration with us for some time.
And Jim, I just want to say, Dulcie's been here in the wings and is sending her love to all of you. I mean, Stan, for
bring her in, bring Dulcie in. Let's say hi to Dulcie.
Yeah, come.
Yes.
Hello.
Hey, Dulcie.
Hi, Dulcie.
Good to see you.
For everybody's edification, Dulcie is the wife of Michael Murphy, and she was comrades in arms with Jim Hickman and I and others in the creation of the Soviet American Exchange Program, which she's continued to the present day as the Russian American Exchange Program, and has dedicated her heart and life really to the improvement and deeper understanding of Russian American relations. And Dulcie, I would love to have you on Humanity Rising over the next couple of months, because the Russian-American relationship is very much up for the world, as it was back in the 1970s and 80s when we launched the program.
Well, I'd love to talk to you about that. Hello to everyone, sending love, and it was so wonderful to be sitting here and over in the wings and getting a cup of coffee and then listening more and writing notes to Michael. Don't forget to say this. Love you all.
Right.
Love you.
So love everyone. And then just so that we know that tomorrow on Humanity Rising, we're going to turn to another extraordinary human being, quite a bit younger, a man by the name of Martin Palmer, who's going to talk about religion and ecology. And Martin Palmer formed with His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, the Alliance for Religion and Culture about 25 years ago to bring the major world religions institutionally into the environmental movement.
Wow.
That was the nexus for the greening of the world religions. And when they disbanded 2 years ago, they counted up that the Alliance had spawned over 1 million discrete projects generated by the world religions for the improvement of ecology. And Martin now works as a personal advisor to Pope Francis and writes many of his speeches. And he's now the founder and chief executive of what they call Fin Invest. It's just worth noting that the religions of the world control more property, more money, and more institutional capacity than any other entity on planet Earth, including governments. And so their capacity to invest ecologically is what Martin's new mission in life is. And so we'll be talking with Martin Palmer and what he's doing with the Vatican and Pope Francis tomorrow on Humanity Rising. But Stan, Brigitte, Michael, Rick, Jim, Susan, and Dulcie, I love you all so much. And the fact that I've been able to share